As our story begins, a disfigured beggar by the name of Hugh Boone peddles matchsticks and poetry in exchange for handouts from the passing crowd. But when a familiar face crosses his path, Boone's demeanor suddenly darkens, thus beginning the adventure of the man with the twisted lip. Back at Baker Street, Watson settles into his armchair for a relaxing evening alone, when a knock at the door brings the doctor face to face with an old friend.
Kate, this is a surprise.
Not a pleasant one, I fear, John.
Thank you, Mrs. Hudson. Perhaps some tea?
That would be most welcome. You must forgive me for causing so much trouble.
Oh, you're causing us no trouble at all. Please.
Your assistant told me that you were dining with Mr. Holmes.
Oh, I see. You've been to the surgery.
And you had just left.
Well, Mr. Holmes has disappeared without trace, as you can see.
In that case, I really shouldn't bother you with my problems.
Oh, Mr. Holmes disappears without trace at regular intervals. There's really no cause for alarm, only curiosity. But, why did you want to see me? If you're ill, you should not be traveling across London.
I am not ill. It's Isa.
Ah, well, if Isa is ill, I can visit him at home.
He is not at home.
He, too, has disappeared without trace.
You can probably guess what he's doing.
I imagine he's indulging his addiction. Opium?
I fear so.
Well, he's done this before, has he not? What makes this circumstance so very different?
Normally, his orgies are confined to one day. He leaves the house in the morning and returns in the evening, pale and shattered.
And this time?
I have not seen Isa for 48 hours.
Have you the remotest idea where he might be?
There is an establishment called the Bar of Gold in Upper Swandam Lane. I believe he is there. But I dare not go there alone.
Oh, no. No respectable woman would go within 100 miles of that vile alley unaccompanied.
Will you come with me?
No.
Oh, but...
No, I shall go there on my own. You will go home, and if your husband is where you think he is, I guarantee to have him back with you within 2 hours. Though I dare not imagine what state he'll be in.
The first act of this episode begins somewhat differently than Conan Doyle's original story. In his book, A Study in Celluloid, Michael Cox recalled, the original story begins with a rare glimpse of Watson's married life. As we had decided to deny Watson a wife in our films, this had to be changed, but we still needed Watson's visitor to launch the plot. Dramatist Alan Plater decided that, as Holmes had temporarily disappeared without a trace from 221B, Watson and Mrs. Hudson would look after the unhappy Mrs. Whitney, who, for the record, was played here by beloved British actress Patricia Harwood, who just happened to be the wife of regular series dramatist Jeremy Paul. At Upper Swandam Lane, the good doctor locates the establishment in question, and inside, his friend, Mr. Isa Whitney, whom he quickly sends homeward in a waiting cab. But not before a surprise encounter with quite a different friend. Mr. Sherlock Holmes, in full disguise, implores the doctor to wait for him outside. According to executive producer Michael Cox, our locations for Upper Swandam Lane, the waterfront, and the City of London were found in King's Lynn, but the interior of the Bar of Gold was reconstructed in a Manchester warehouse. A new director to the series, Patrick Lau, reveled in these exotic and sinister settings and created, perhaps, the most truthful picture of Victorian squalor in any of our films.
Holmes!
Hi, sir.
I'm certainly surprised to see you in that place.
I suppose you think I've added opium smoking to all my other little weaknesses.
I merely said I was surprised to see you there.
As indeed I was to see you.
I was searching for a friend.
And I felt an enemy.
An enemy?
Had I been recognized in that place, my life would not have been worth an hour's purchase. John! I'm in the midst of the most remarkable inquiry.
I hope you're not smoking the substance in that pipe, Holmes.
Only to the extent necessary to merge with the surroundings. I'm off to Lee, in Kent. Are you coming?
Of course.
On the dog cart ride to Lee in Kent, Holmes explains that his client is the wife of one Neville St. Clair, a successful man who, along with his family, occupies the Cedars, a lovely villa in Lee. However, 2 days ago, her husband departed for his work in the city, promising to return with building bricks for his children. But Neville St. Clair never returned.
Soon after he left, Mrs. St. Clair received a telegram to say that a parcel of considerable value had arrived for her to the offices of the Aberdeen Shipping Company. She decided to travel to the city, collect her parcel, have lunch, and do some shopping. It was by chance that she found herself in Upper Swandam Lane, that same vile alley that we both visited this evening, Watson. And it was at this point that something quite singular took place.
Mrs. St. Clair happened to look upward, only to spy her husband in the upper window of the Bar of Gold, the very opium den that Holmes and Watson had patronized earlier. Neville screamed and appeared to be pulled back into the building. Mrs. St. Clair attempted to gain admission, but was forcibly removed by a Malay and Lascar who owned the establishment. The police soon arrived, but instead of detaining those two men, the inspector arrested the only other man present, a terribly deformed cripple by the name of Hugh Boone. The incredible facial prosthetics of beggar Hugh Boone were created by one of Granada's top makeup artists, the incomparable Glenda Wood, and the application of that makeup was no small feat, as actor Clive Francis attested in a conversation with Luke and me just a few weeks back.
But with Glenda, of course, they didn't have the techniques they have now. So it was a long, painstaking affair of going in every day, very early, and literally having my top lip glued to the roof of my face, practically, and my eyes drawn across, and God knows she did the most amazing things. And it was a very long, drawn-out procedure. They would then send a member of the crew would come over and would escort me from the makeup room down these corridors, because I couldn't see where I was going. I was half blind, you see, with all, and they would escort me to where the set was, and the set was on the other side of the studios. And to get to it, you had to cross over sort of a car park area. Anyway, one day we'd finished this long makeup course, which went on, as I say, for about 3.5 hours or something, and nobody came to pick me up. We didn't have sort of mobile phones in those days to sort of ring, where is so-and-so? So I said, well, don't worry, I'm sure I'll find my own way. So I sort of felt my way down the corridor, dressed in these tatty clothes and this makeup and this awful wig on my head, and much to the shock and horror of people I was passing. And I sort of found the door that led to this car park area. Unbeknown to me, they were shooting a live soap that day, an episode of some soap in this car park. So as I opened this door and started to wander across through this, I sort of vaguely saw faces and bodies. I thought it was my set. I was waiting for somebody to come and say, hi, good. glad you're here. And this man came screaming at me, get off, get off, get off, get off, get off. I said, what's going on? He said, this is not, you're not supposed to be here. And I got very, I thought, well, don't talk to me like that, please. I can't see and I can't speak very well. And I'm supposed to be playing a man who's got a twisted lip and I'm trying to find where I have to go. He said, well, you don't come here, get out, get out. It was horrible. Anyway, unfortunately, he became so nasty, I lost my temper. And in doing so, my lip burst in all directions. My eye flashed open. All the makeup went to hell. So I had to go all the way back down the corridor to the makeup department, and they started all over again. Eventually, somebody came and picked me up. Yes, that was a very long day. We lost a couple of hours filming that day because of the.
And that's just a little teaser, as we will be releasing our full conversation with Mr. Francis very, very soon. But for now, let's return to our story. Upon their arrival at the Cedars, Mrs. St. Clair inquires as to the detective's progress.
Now, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, before we eat, I should like to ask one or two plain questions to which I should like plain answers.
Certainly, madam.
Do you, in your heart of hearts, think that Neville is still alive? Frankly now, I'm not hysterical, nor am I given to fainting.
Frankly, then, I do not.
You think he is dead?
I do.
Murdered?
I don't see that. Perhaps.
And on what day did he meet his death?
On Monday.
So then, how do you explain that I received a letter from him today, being Friday?
Holmes examines the letter and asks the lady to recount the remainder of her story for the benefit of Dr. Watson. She recalls that after being ejected from the Laskers building, she returned with the police, led by Inspector Bradstreet. A preliminary search of the premises revealed nothing strange, save the presence of the beggar, Hugh Boone. But a closer examination revealed a box of children's building bricks, as well as the clothing of Neville St. Clair. A bloodstain was also later found on the windowsill. They only failed in locating the overcoat of Mr. St. Clair until low tide, when the garment washed up on shore, the pockets filled with coins.
There were 421 pennies, 270 halfpennies stuffed into every pocket of the overcoat. Your conclusion, Watson.
Speak freely, Dr. Watson. I've lived with every possibility this past week, however hideous.
Well, the murderer must have been Boone the beggar. Who else could have access to such a vast number of pennies and halfpennies?
That is the conclusion reached by the police. They've arrested Boone. He is presently in Bow Street Police Station.
Even though my husband is still alive.
Now, Mrs. Sinclair, let us re-examine the significance of this letter. May I read it to Dr. Watson?
By all means.
Dearest, do not be frightened. There is a huge error which it may take some little time to rectify. Wait in patience, Neville. Written in pencil on the flyleaf of a book, octavo size, no watermark. Posted in Gravesend by a man with a dirty thumb. This is not your husband's writing.
No.
But the note is.
Without question. It's the hand he always used when he was in a hurry.
Whoever gummed down the envelope had, unless I'm very much in error, been chewing tobacco. It is a trifle, of course, Watson. But there's nothing so important as trifles. Mrs. Sinclair, there was an enclosure.
Signet ring.
Mrs. Sinclair, has your husband ever spoken of the bar of gold in Upper Swandam Lane?
Never.
I suspect that Dr. Watson has a question to put to you.
This is a difficult question to ask, Mrs. Sinclair, but Has your husband ever shown any signs of taking opium?
He always appeared perfectly normal. Though I confess I would not recognize the signs. What are they?
Listlessness, a lack of energy, an inability to concentrate, a general air of apathy.
Dr. Watson is a specialist in uncontrolled addiction.
My husband was not an opium addict. That's to say, is not an opium addict. Mr. Holmes, I know you think my husband is dead. I fully realize that letter could have been written on Monday and only posted today. I know the circumstances as they have been described lead to the inescapable conclusion that he has been murdered. But equally, I know that he is alive. There is such a keen bond of sympathy between us. I should know if evil came upon him. Please help me to find him.
The implacable Mrs. St. Clair was portrayed here by Eleanor David. Born Maria Eleanor David in Lincolnshire on November 30th, 1955, David appeared in a number of shows and films in the 80s, including The Scarlet Pimpernel with Denis Lill, aka Inspector Bradstreet, and Pink Floyd's The Wall, directed by Alan Parker, before landing the title role in Sylvia, a biopic about the pioneering educationalist Sylvia Ashton Warner, a role that would win her worldwide acclaim, with Andrew Sarris of The Village Voice calling it one of the best films of 1985. From there, David would leave her indelible mark on dozens of film and television projects, including Lovejoy, Rumple of the Bailey, Midsummer Murders, and the 1989 cult sci-fi film Slipstream, where she starred opposite Mark Hamill, Bill Paxton, and Ben Kingsley. And she even found herself in the world of the great detective once more, in the 2004 BBC film Sherlock Holmes and the Case of the Silk Stocking, where she played Mary Pentney, the wife of George Pentney, who was played by Jonathan Hyde, known to fans of the Granada series as Culverton Smith. David's final listed role was that of Kathleen on the Sky series Playhouse Presents in their presentation of Stage Door Johnnies, which was directed by Catherine McCormick. Today, Eleanor David resides near London at the age of 65. That night, as the family sleeps, Watson joins his friend, who smokes as he contemplates the mystery.
Watson, if Noel St. Clair is alive and well, why doesn't he come home and demonstrate the fact?
Well, presumably because he's not alive and well.
Yes, but this letter
Could have been written at any time, perhaps under duress. It could even be a skillful forgery.
and the signet ring?
Easily removed, especially if the victim is dead.
Indeed. Proceeding on the hypothesis that Neville St. Clair is dead, how did he meet his death?
Well, clearly he was murdered.
By whom?
Well, the police think it was this chap Boone. I see no reason to disagree with the police. Except,
Except what?
you say he's a cripple.
Yes.
How severe is his disability?
It's only a slight limp.
Well, my medical experience tells me that when there is a weakness in one limb, it's very often compensated for by exceptional strength in the others. You're not convinced?
This man is a professional beggar. He's well known in the city. He's well liked in the city. I've seen him many times. He has a remarkable faculty for repartee with which he delights his many clients.
Well, he sounds harmless. Why, therefore, did the police arrest him rather than the Lascar?
That is the very question that I put to Inspector Bradstreet.
Finding that the Lascar was eliminated as an accomplice after Mrs. St. Clair testified that he was already downstairs when she entered the establishment, Holmes and Bradstreet examined St. Clair's belongings.
How do you explain the coins and the overcoat?
I cannot truly answer that, Mr. Holmes.
Let me try. Boone kills St. Clair. He removes the outer garments, hoping to capitalize on them and their contents. He lifts the body, carries it across the room, forces it through the open window, hence the abrasion. Blood upon the windowsill. He releases it into the river.
Where it's sucked away by the tide.
In the midst of this activity, he hears the scuffle downstairs as Mrs. St. Clair tries to force her way in. There's not a moment to be lost.
Must dispose of the clothing.
He starts with the overcoat. He realizes at once it will float and not sink. So what does he do? He rushes across the room to some secret hoard where he's accumulated the fruits of his beggary, stuffs all the coins that he can lay his hands on into the pockets of the overcoat,
And drops it into the water.
and would presumably have done the same with the other garments if you and your men had not arrived.
Conceals the other garments behind the curtain in the hope they'll not be noticed, and they would not have been noticed had Mrs. St. Clair not been so persistent.
Inspector, whatever plot has been hatched in that opium den, I cannot but imagine that the Lascar is not somehow involved.
I was sorely tempted to arrest him on the day. I'll send a couple of men up there now.
No, Inspector, with your permission, may I suggest an alternative strategy?
By all means.
Let me visit the opium den, discreetly, incognito. We shall learn what we may.
But what did you learn?
Nothing. Nothing.
The always affable Inspector Bradstreet makes his second series appearance here, the first being the Blue Carbuncle back in Season 1. However, in that episode, the inspector was played by actor Brian Miller. According to Michael Cox, by the time they reached the man with the twisted lip, the production, unfortunately, overlooked Bradstreet's previous appearance, and Denis Lill was cast in the part. Lill, born in 1942 in Hamilton, New Zealand, joined the Royal New Zealand Air Force in 1959, where he often found himself in trouble for his amateur dramatics and a fondness for mimicking characters on the BBC's Goon Show. But in 1967, he said goodbye to his homeland and began his acting career in Britain. Lill, who is still working today, has enjoyed an incredible career on stage, film, and television. With over 100 IMDb credits to his name, he has appeared in everything from Doctor Who to Red Dwarf, and from Alan Parker's Evita to Tim Burton's Batman. He also appeared with Edward Hardwicke in Ian McKellen's film Richard III. He even played Dr. John Watson to Keith Mitchell's Sherlock Holmes in the 1979 production of The Crucifer of Blood at the Haymarket Theatre in London. And while perhaps not his most celebrated role, Lill's appearance as Inspector Bradstreet was considered so successful that he would return twice more, though uncanonically in the Bruce Partington Plans and the Mazarin Stone. Today, Denis Lill resides in Ryman Trinsica in Dorset at the age of 79. While Watson sleeps, Holmes ponders the problem through the night. But as the morning comes, and he splashes cleansing water upon his own face, the detective has an epiphany. Confidently, he wakes his sleeping friend.
Watson.
Watson.
Well, what time is it?
Dawn.
I've only had 2 hours sleep.
I wonder if you'd do me the very great kindness of considering the possibility of waking up.
I assume you have a good reason.
Are you game for the drive?
Certainly, but does it have to be this early?
I have a little theory I wish to test.
Is anyone's life at stake?
Certainly not.
Wouldn't it be possible to test your theory a little later this morning?
I'll see you downstairs in 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
Jeremy Brett, according to Michael Cox, particularly enjoyed this stage of the story, the construction of the divan, which was matched almost exactly to the Sidney Paget illustration, and Holmes's enormous consumption of tobacco as he thinks the problem through, while Watson snatches an hour or two of sleep. Jeremy also enjoyed finding new aspects of Holmes, and he relished the meditative stillness of this sequence, although inspiration does not strike until he washes his face at dawn. It is interesting that, in order to wake the sleeping Watson, the great man has to resort to tickling one of the doctor's feet, which protrudes from the bedclothes. It reminds one, irresistibly, of Holmes' first words to his friend at a similar moment in the Abbey Grange. At the Bow Street police station, Holmes, with a Gladstone bag in hand, requests an interview with the beggar, Hugh Boone. Inside his cell, Boone sleeps, but Holmes quietly enters, opens his bag, and reveals the key to the mystery. As Boone awakes, the detective brandishes a large sponge, which he soaks with soap and water and applies to the man's face. His face reveals him to be none other than Mr. Neville St. Clair himself. Watson and Bradstreet are astonished. Tonight's episode features a very special actor in the dual role of Hugh Boone and Mr. Neville St. Clair. So, let's take just a moment to meet Mr. Clive Francis. Born in 1946 in Eastbourne, Sussex, Francis was the son of accomplished actors Raymond Francis and Margaret Towner, and according to Clive, his career in acting was a foregone conclusion. His first role came in 1955, when, in Romeo and Juliet, he played a page to the Duke of Venice. As he later recalled, "I was 9 and had tights that were forever wrinkling. Some kind soul told me that the trick was to wrap a penny around the top to prevent this happening. The result was a lot of penny spillage at inopportune moments." Francis has worked continually for the stage and screen ever since. After graduating from the Royal School of Dramatic Arts in London, his first television role was playing Tommy Traddles opposite Ian McKellen in the 1966 production of David Copperfield for BBC One. Other familiar faces from that production included Colin Jevons, Joss Ackland, and a slew of other fine actors from the Granada Holmes series. Sadly, only 4 of that 13-episode miniseries are still known to exist. Francis's acting achievements are massive and varied, but just sticking with a few of his Granada series connections for a moment, he appeared to great reviews opposite Laurence Olivier in Saturday, Sunday, Monday, a play for Granada with Dame Joan Plowright, Nicholas Clay of The Resident Patient, and Frank Finlay of The Golden Pince-Nez. In 1975, he co-starred with his good friend Robin Ellis in Poldark, playing the protagonist's debt-ridden cousin. Ellis, of course, would appear in Shoscombe Old Place as Sir Robert Norberton, another episode directed by Patrick Lau. Additionally, Francis has appeared in over 20 West End shows, including his one-man version of A Christmas Carol, which he adapted for the stage. Francis also brought, from the page to the stage, a unique 5-man adaptation of The Hound of the Baskervilles, in which 4 of the actors would play all of the supporting characters, including each playing Dr. Watson at different points in the play. The production received critical acclaim for its unique take on a classic tale. His most recent work includes the role of Lord Salisbury in the Netflix series The Crown and Pope Abel in the 2020 series Cursed. But of course, many will know him best from Stanley Kubrick's classic A Clockwork Orange, in which he portrayed Joe the Lodger, who munchy-wunches lomticks of toast and moves into Alex's room while he is away for rehabilitation.
I've heard about you. I know what you've done. Breaking the hearts of your poor, grieving parents. So you're back, eh? You're back to make life a misery for your lovely parents once more as at it. Well, over my dead corpse you will, because you see they've let me be more like a son to them than like a lodger.
Joe, don't go fighting here, boys.
Well, do put your hand over your mouth, please. It's bloody revolting.
But on top of being a successful actor and writer, Mr. Francis is also accomplished in the art of caricature. Inspired, as a boy, by Ronald Searle's famous drawings in the back pages of Punch magazine, Francis taught himself to draw by copying those very same sketches. The backs of his scripts soon became artistic renderings of his fellow actors. And while rehearsing for Caesar and Cleopatra, Sir Alec Guinness spotted him, crouched in a corner, scribbling. When he discovered that Francis was lampooning other members of the cast, Sir Alec graciously declined to look. So Francis was hugely gratified when 14 years later, Guinness selected Clive's design for the cover of his autobiography. Francis would also provide artwork for Laurence Olivier's playbills, John Gielgud's theater, Noel Coward's theater, and more. His incredible artwork can be seen and prints purchased at CliveFrancisCaricaturist.com. And for the record, we have mentioned to Mr. Francis that a sketch of Mr. Brett would be quite a welcome addition to his collection. He said he will consider it. At the age of 75, Mr. Francis currently resides in Spelthorne, Surrey. Later, in Bradstreet's office, Neville St. Clair reveals the rest of the story.
Let it be understood that I would have endured imprisonment, even execution, rather than reveal my miserable secret to my wife and children.
All is now revealed, Mr. St. Clair.
So be it. My father was a schoolmaster in Chesterfield. I received an excellent education, traveled, took to the stage, and finally became a reporter on a London newspaper. One day, my editor wished to have a series of articles upon begging in the metropolis, and I volunteered to supply them.
So you became a beggar?
Yes.
And your experience as an actor must have proved invaluable.
Yes. Exactly. Yes, I painted my face to make myself look as pitiable as possible. I manufactured frightening scars. I twisted my lip with the aid of a piece of flesh-colored plaster. And then with a dark wig and appropriate clothing, took my position in the busiest part of the metropolis. Ostensibly as a match seller, but yes, really as a beggar.
And you did well?
Yes. In one day I took 26 shillings and 4 pence. I wrote my articles for the newspaper, my editor was delighted, and I thought no more about it. Until one day, I backed a bill for a friend of mine and had a writ served on me for £25. Well, I was at my wit's end. I mean, What could I do? And then suddenly an idea came to me. I asked for a fortnight's holiday from my employers and spent the time in the city, begging. In 10 days, I had the money and was able to pay back the debt. That was when I fell into the trap.
How much were you earning from the newspaper at this time?
£2 a week.
Far less than begging.
Yeah. During the last few years, I have earned on average at least £700 a year.
But that's a gentleman's income.
Calmly, Bradstreet. I think it is pertinent to say that Mr. Sinclair is no ordinary beggar.
People do not expect a beggar to quote extensively from Shakespeare, Mr. Dickens, the Bible, or the latest popular songs.
An aristocrat among beggars.
Well, it is not for me to claim such a distinction, but as the inspector rightly observes, I had a gentleman's income, so I proceeded to live like a gentleman. I bought a villa in Kent. I married a beautiful and respectable woman. And every morning I traveled to my business in the city.
You must have been embroiled with the Lascar by this time.
Yes, I paid him a generous rent for the use of his upstairs rooms. My secret was safe with him. I fell among thieves, but found honor of a sort. You see, every morning I would emerge as a squalid beggar, and every evening transformed into a gentleman.
St. Clair explains that he had just finished begging for the day when his wife saw him from the street. Quickly, he convinced the Lascar to distract her, and he frantically transformed back into Hugh Boone. He then desperately attempted to weigh down his clothes with coins and toss them into the harbor outside the window. But the police arrived too soon, and he was unable to complete the task. In his haste, he cut himself on the windowsill.
And thus I was arrested on suspicion of having murdered myself.
And thus you caused your wife much anguish.
But I wrote her a letter.
And gave it to the Lascar to post?
Yes.
It was not delivered. It arrived yesterday.
He probably gave it to one of his sailor customers.
I shall never forgive myself the agony which I have inflicted upon my wife. Can I go to her now?
I think we must impose one condition, Mr. Sinclair.
Anything.
There must be no more of Hugh Boone.
I swear it by the most solemn oath that a man can take.
Sherlock Holmes watches him with uncertainty. But later, Neville St. Clair disposes of the last vestiges of Hugh Boone, throwing his wig, clothes, and makeup into a great fire.
Farewell, sweet Boone. A flight of angels sing thee to thy rest. William Shakespeare.
Original episode air date on the ITV network was August 13th, 1986, at 9 p.m. Dramatized by Alan Plater and directed by Patrick Lau. Now, we've met Alan Plater before, on the very first episode ever filmed, The Solitary Cyclist. But The Man with a Twisted Lip marks his second and final installment in the series. And while it is a bit sad that such a notable writer had such a short stay on Baker Street, his two contributions are nothing short of stellar. In an interview with Richard Whiteley, Plater claimed he had never wanted to write the sort of, quote, rubbish programs featuring high-speed car crashes, of which there are too many on television, end quote. He said that he had always tried to make his characters normal people, whose normal lives are interrupted when the outside world intrudes. Thank you, Mr. Plater, for all of your incredible work. Director Patrick Lau, however, makes his series debut here. And while he would also contribute a total of 2 episodes, the other being Shawscombe Old Place, Mr. Lau has had quite a career as well, directing for the stage and screen. Little is known, or at least written, about Lau's early life, but according to his own biography, after winning the Independent Television Authority Award as a university undergraduate, he quickly made a name for himself as one of the few ethnic Chinese directing professionally both in the theater and on television in the 1970s. His body of work quickly grew, including a wide range of classical and contemporary plays in over 60 theater productions in London, Edinburgh, and Cambridge, as well as in Australia and Hong Kong. According to actor Clive Francis, who, in addition to tonight's program, was also directed by Lau in Tom Stoppard's play, Travesties, at the Royal Lyceum Theatre, it was around 1980 when Lau decided to make a significant shift to the screen, leaving behind the stage, at least for a while, to train with Granada Television. From there, he would direct many major drama and documentary films for the BBC, ITV, and C4, working with the likes of Sir Ian McKellen, Sir Nigel Hawthorne, Sir Ian Holm, and more, to say nothing of his impressive 23-episode stint on Coronation Street. Over the years, Lau took home many awards for his work, including a Scottish BAFTA for Best Drama Series in 1993 and the International Film and TV Festival of New York's Gold Medal for his series Countdown to War in 1990. Patrick Lau also teaches, frequently giving masterclasses at the University of the Arts Saint Martin, the Actors Centre and Drama Studio in London, and at the Ryerson University in Toronto. So with that, let's head over to our divans, where Luke awaits in patience for a discussion of this fantastic tale. Is St. Clair really lost beyond ken? Was he seen in an opium den? All the clues point to murder, but the truth is absurder, and Holmes' logic wins out once again. The Man with the Twisted Lip Limerick by Hugo Award-winning author Isaac Asimov. I like that one. It's not often that you get to read the word absurder. Well done, Isaac.
Yeah, I didn't know what you were saying at first. And also, where is Ken exactly?
Well, Ken has a few definitions, and one of them is one's range of knowledge or sight.
All right, we'll give it to him.
Let's jump right in. And again, we can start with the intro music, another slight variation on the theme with a flourish at the end, very similar to the Abbey Grange. And there is something I do think we should say about this. Now, we don't usually like to spill the beans on Sherlockian conversations that we have collected and are not yet ready to release, but we did have a great talk with series editor Chris Gill very recently, who did confirm that the intro music was recorded anew for almost every episode. Now, we don't have confirmation of this per se, but he made it clear to us that union rules used to dictate that they couldn't reuse the same recording each time.
Yeah.
So we aren't totally crazy, or at least he made us feel like we're not totally crazy.
Well, you tell me if I'm crazy. I felt this time around that the bass and the cello came through quite a bit more.
Well, see, this is another thing. I often feel like whether or not it's a new recording, it almost certainly is often a new mix.
Yeah.
It's hard to differentiate, those two things. But yeah, you're right, like the quality of the recording. But I will also say this, when I'm editing these episodes, the very first thing I listen to is the music, because it's the first thing I pull and put in each episode, because I try to put the one from the exact episode in with the one we're talking about.
Yeah.
And the overall mix of this episode is significantly lower than every episode up to this point.
Mm-hmm. I mean, even just with our limited experience of working with an orchestra, it's not surprising that you would bring them the same music and they would play it very similar each time.
Right.
It's just depending on how you mic it, things come out differently.
Well, and it's just something we've talked about so many times. I thought it was worth bringing up. And as for our interview with Chris Gill, we will be releasing that at a later time, which we'll come back to. Let's talk about the first segment of this one, because I have to admit, I have a bit of a bee in my bonnet about this scene. We see Boone peddling matchsticks, and he clearly recognizes Isa Whitney, which, first of all, does that make any sense? I mean, well, not sure it does, but we'll come back to that. My real question is, what is Isa Whitney doing? He looks really upset and worried, and
He's sneaking away to get high.
Yeah. So is this just meant to depict him in the throes of opium withdrawals? I suppose it must. But here's the thing. I haven't made up my mind if this is a brilliant bit of misdirection or, frankly, more of a cheat.
Mm-hmm.
And I only say this because if you were to remove this entire sequence from the show, nothing would really change. It's just a bit of something to look at whose ultimate meaning is really nothing. Because if Hugh Boone recognizes Whitney from the Bar of Gold, what does that mean for the story?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's kind of one of those things. This whole episode, I should say the story, because it is pretty faithful to the story.
Yeah.
It is misdirection. I mean, the whole thing starts with Isa, and then
True.
You are wondering, like, why do we care about this person? And then he's instantly like, oh, you're just high for 3 days, so we'll put you in a cart and you're done. And then, so it feels like misdirection even from the story. It's just that they stuck Boone at the beginning.
Yeah. But since these characters never cross paths again, I don't know, I can't find the right word for it. It just feels slightly disingenuous in some strange way.
Yeah.
Not really a hard knock against it or anything. It's just, upon repeated viewings, I always go, wow, this sequence really doesn't have a wider meaning.
Speaking of not having a wider meaning, how about the invalid and the hurdy-gurdy?
Yeah, I was wondering, if we should mention that. I guess it
always sticks out to me. I always look for it. I'm always waiting for it to come back around. She plays one hell of a hurdy-gurdy.
And as Michael Cox mentions in his book, Patrick Lau, the director, certainly did do a great job in this one of depicting Victorian squalor in that scene right there.
Sure.
It's like, but when Mrs. Whitney arrives on Baker Street and witnesses a mugging and plenty of other begging there too, apparently squalor has bled all the way over to 221B.
Right.
Which, I mean, perhaps maybe that tracks with the reality of Baker Street at the time. I'm not sure about that. But if I'm being honest, it's not really what I think of when I think of our beloved street. I don't think of it as a slum, So I just found this scene, again, slightly off kilter maybe, but just slightly. I do like how it's done. I think it's a great scene. And I like to get to see Baker Street at night, so that's always nice to see.
Well, maybe that's it. Maybe it's just nighttime brings them out. I mean,
yeah.
But speaking of in your face again, I felt like the very first shot of the man with the twisted lip himself, his lip is very twisted up.
Sure.
Really way up. And it's like, it's perfect in that close up, and then it's different later. But
yeah,
I just thought like that was a great shot, that first opening shot.
Definitely a great shot. I mean, yeah, and we'll certainly come back to the makeup because it deserves some attention. But
yeah,
let's talk about Edward Hardwicke in these early scenes.
Yeah,
I really, really love him here. I think that this is the first episode that Edward feels 100% like Watson to me.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like he's no longer nervous or finding the character. He is Watson now, and I think that's great to see. And the moment when Mrs. Whitney arrives and Watson throws down the paper in annoyance, I think that might be one of my favorite tiny little Watson moments in the entire series.
He's almost doing a little bit of like, no, I'm not here, right before that too. And it's like, yeah. Like you said, he's moved in now.
Yeah.
And I like that they've exchanged Mrs. Hudson for what should have been Mary at that point.
Yeah.
I mean, they obviously decided not to include Mary in the show, really. So I thought it was nice that they brought Mrs. Hudson back for that. It was a good little back and forth between them two.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, a quick mention for Patricia Garwood. She's quite good here as Mrs. Whitney. And, this is writer Jeremy Paul's wife. So nice to see her make an appearance. But also, I really adore her little scene with Mrs. Hudson here.
Yeah.
When she says, I sometimes wonder if men ever truly grow up. It's clearly not from the story, but it's just a nice, brief little moment for Mrs. Hudson to get some screen time, offer some sage wisdom, which, always a good idea.
Yep. I thought that was good. I mean, it's kind of unfortunate. Then her character is just, that's it. That's all we need you for.
Yeah.
I wrote down 7 minutes in, sketchy dude, inquiring about a prostitute, ?
Yeah.
Testing her shoulder rigidity, ?
He's trying to make a deal with the pimp. Yeah, I don't know. It was a very strange moment.
Everybody was very dirty too.
Yeah, well, like Michael Cox said, Victorian squalor. I mean, this whole episode just kind of drips with it, which is pretty great. I mean, it's pretty intense. It's pretty great.
Yeah, especially right into the opium den too. It's like,
yeah.
I mean, I don't know much about opium, but it all seemed very realistic. You know, like the tar that they were melting and like pouring in there. It's like
there's actually an incredible amount of detail in the scene when the Malay gets up to meet Watson. Did you notice the man's arm hanging down from the upper bunk and how his super long fingernails were like glowing translucently from the backlight?
I did notice that, yeah.
What an incredible detail. I mean, and it's followed by a man like drooling all over himself, which really gritty, kind of disturbing, but I gotta wonder if people would have even seen these details before high definition.
Yeah, I mean, I would wonder if you would see them if only viewing them one time either, you know.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
There's a lot of stuff in the original story about like descriptions of people being contorted and just drooling, and like I think Isa was meant to be like on his hands and knees just staring at a flame, and it's a pretty rich description, and I think they just did a great job of actually bringing it to life.
And then, of course, the very next scene, I gotta say, I do love it when Holmes gets to drive his own dog cart.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, this is from the story, and I'm glad they kept it in. However, the implementation of this sequence leaves something to be desired. I mean, they're clearly not moving. There's no wind. It's just somebody shaking the cart and there's a black background.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, I understand from a filming point of view, it's easier and cheaper to do that, but it's a bit tame, and it's frankly a little underwhelming for this series.
Yeah, but I mean, I think you got to give him some things, because like I actually made a note for later on, but when he says, Watson, you're in the presence of one of the absolute fools of Europe, I wrote down, well, for one, it's Jeremy driving the cart.
Yeah.
And I put down that it's just great audio.
Yeah.
And it must have been lav packs in the carriage or amazing ADR.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the exact opposite of this sequence, because that one's great. That one's perfect.
Again, it's technology at the time. Like, that was a daytime shot.
Yeah.
Cameras struggle in the nighttime, but it's short.
Yeah.
And he says, I'm off to Lee and Kent. Are you coming? He says, of course. And then the theme music kicks in.
Yeah. I was wondering what you thought about that choice, because I'm not sure what I think about it. I mean, it's not terrible, but it's also strangely not perfect either, because that never happens in the entire series except right here.
It's kind of their Avengers Assemble moment.
Yeah.
It's not exactly the biggest moment.
Yeah.
But it feels okay to me. And the reason I think it does is because when I watch Poirot and the theme music comes on, it's like, I don't like the theme music, and they use it way too often.
Yeah.
So in this one, it was like, you just hear it one more time. And it's like, yeah, that was pretty good.
It's just unexpected, because the theme does occur in almost all of the music, but we don't actually cut to the opening credits score.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know. I always just wonder about these little moments. Like, was it Patrick Lau going, you know what's going to be perfect here is the theme music that we already heard 5 minutes ago?
Mm-hmm.
Or was somebody going, we're over budget on the score? I
can't imagine it's that.
Yeah.
But it must have been a discussion or even an argument with Patrick Gowers.
Yeah. And back to the dog cart, I do like this sequence. I like Watson's bad attitude.
Yeah, but I didn't really understand why he was that way. Like, why was he so skeptical?
I know, and it's not in the story, so it's really just kind of an interesting choice by the writer. But it does make for a more interesting conversation than Watson just, you know, in the story, he's just like, I understand, continue. Yes, Holmes, tell me more. You know, there's nothing to the conversation.
But see, like, that's kind of the interesting thing about that part of the story is, you know, Holmes has the line, you have the great gift of silence, Watson. And he says that to him because Holmes is just talking. Or no, Holmes is just thinking.
Sure.
It's basically saying, thanks for letting me just think while we were driving rather than you just jabbering in my ear.
Yeah. I think the reason it works, though, is, you know, the episode starts, he wants to sit down in his chair, read his newspaper.
That's true.
And automatically he's had his night ruined.
Yeah.
And it just keeps getting worse.
But it seemed like he was happy to go on an adventure. When they get in the cab, maybe the theme music put him off.
Well, flashing forward a little bit to the flashback, I have to say, the St. Clair's little girl, what an amazingly like period perfect looking person. And she looks like a drawing from an old tin of baking soda or something.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just great casting. I don't know if this was the daughter of someone on the cast or crew, but
I did think something similar, but I went in a different direction. And I thought, like, when Watson and Holmes leave the house and she's just in the window,
yeah,
I thought if you put like the Exorcist theme music under it or something, you'd get a different vibe.
Yes, definitely. Backing up for a moment, we've discussed this in the past, but there's another example of audio phasing here.
Yeah.
When Mrs. St. Clair is getting accosted by the beggar children in Upper Swandam. And it's hard to know if, in this particular case, this is an artifact.
I think that's on purpose.
You think so?
Yeah, I put it under bad with the note that says, should this be a good note? Because I think it's off by more than a few milliseconds, and it's only during that part.
It's interesting. Yeah, I don't know, because it's only the only thing that's phasing is the scuffling sounds of their feet when they're coming in and out of the building, which,
yeah,
again, for people who may not know what we're talking about, that when in the sequence where Mrs. St. Clair is getting accosted and all these beggar children are coming after her, if you just listen to their feet scuffling, it's like there's a bizarre echo on their feet. And it's like a nightmare reverb sound. I just always assume it's a mistake when I hear it, because most of the time it is in this show. It's not supposed to be phasing when it's horse hooves and things like that.
Right.
But in this scene, it's hard to know for sure.
I think personally in this scene, it was done on purpose, but I don't know exactly why. I almost wonder if it was they wanted it to make it sound like there was more kids coming out.
Possibly.
Because when they open the door, the kids come out and then she runs away. And then all the sailors are like, get off out of it. And then like they cut back to her and there's like, she's surrounded by kids.
Yeah.
And it's almost like, wait, where did all those kids come from? So maybe they tried to fix it with audio and
possibly, yeah.
In the moment, you never know.
It's a good scene. I love the squalor. I love all the dirty kids, and all the dirty people. It's so great. So well done.
Yeah. Like the girl on the street with the piece of fabric who leads Mrs. St. Clair to her friend or mother with the destitute sign on it.
Yeah.
I just like, we don't put enough signs on people these days.
Yeah.
She shows up again at the end, which I didn't notice before.
And, it's hard to talk about this one because of all the flashbacks. We keep jumping all over the place. But
yeah,
technically, the next note I have is when they arrive at the Cedars, and there are some, shall we say, interesting lighting choices here. When they enter the dining room, there is what can really only be described as a spotlight on Holmes by the dinner table. He isn't in it for very long, and it's only in the wide, but it's a bright light, and like it's just interesting choices. Like it's a nighttime scene, so under what circumstances would there be a colossally bright light?
Yeah,
it's just very, very strange.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
My next note is I don't even really have a note. I just wrote down Bradstreet's Derby, plum colored ? With a green band.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell if it was brown or plum colored, but it really looked purplish plum, and with a green band. Wow, could you get more like Penguin from Batman than that hat?
I mean, you got to wonder sometimes if it's a film or coloring or something. But yeah, it's a funky hat. I think Watson has one just like it at some point.
Yeah, probably the same hat. My next note is the moment where Holmes is going through the letter that Mrs. St. Clair received.
Yeah.
And he says a really great line, which is, whoever gummed down the envelope had been chewing tobacco. This is a trifle, of course. This is a great moment. And obviously the line about trifles is an iconic one. But it's different than the story, which I assume they changed for time because it is longer in the story. But I gotta say, as great as this script is, I really like this original deduction. Do you mind if I read it?
Do it.
I'm just going to read it into the record. Holmes says, I perceive also that whoever addressed the envelope had to go and inquire as to the address. How can you tell that? Asked Miss St. Clair. The name, you see, is in perfectly black ink, which has dried itself. The rest is of a grayish color, which shows that blotting paper has been used. If it had been written straight off and then blotted, none would be of the deep black shade. This man has written the name, and there has then been a pause before he wrote the address, which can only mean that he was not familiar with it. It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles. So it's just so classic And, you know, what we got is good. It's concise, but I think this one is undeniably cooler. I guess one could argue that it's not the best deduction because it could just be he took a break in the writing.
Yeah.
But I think the logic is solid enough that I just like hearing them talking about the ink, you know, and then the blotting. And
no, it's a good bit of deduction, but I do wonder if the logic was something to do with it gives away too much.
Yeah.
Because in the story, there's a lot of those kind of things. There's a lot of like nods. I remember towards the end, Bradstreet is saying, he really stinks. He could really use a bath. And then Holmes is like, well, yeah, that sounds like that's what I was thinking. And then he goes in and basically washes his face. And it's almost like you're setting it up too much. And I wonder if they just swapped it around so they get the trifles line in there, but maybe didn't give away too much.
Yeah. Well, and again, it's so many flashbacks in this one. We're jumping around all the time, but the scene that comes next is the one between Bradstreet and Holmes, most of which is in close-up, almost an uncomfortably close-up, you know, when Holmes and Bradstreet are looking at the coins in his pocket and is smelling his wallet and all this kind of stuff. But the performances are really great, so it really works. And again, some really nice hand acting from Jeremy.
Yeah, and some great stuff from Bradstreet too. I mean, it kind of goes by you sometimes, but he's just trying to keep up. Like I think he's great.
Yeah, Denis Lill. Yeah, he's really good in this one. And then we're back in the bedroom again after that flashback. And I don't know, I really like this scene. Again, Holmes and Watson, especially Watson, I feel like he's really in the character now. You know, when he's wanting to go to bed, but he's trying to contribute, and just the little tiniest back and forth stuff between them, like when he says, you say he's a cripple, and Holmes is like, yes. It's like very rarely is Holmes that on bated breath, you know, about what Watson is going to say in response to something.
Yeah.
It's really nice back and forth. Really good scene.
There's a little bit of that earlier as well when Mrs. St. Clair hands him the letter and he says, Mrs. St. Clair, there was an inclusion. And it's his face in that moment and the hand gestures that are followed. But then there's like this surprise reaction when she says his signet ring and he goes, his, like right. he huh? Like he stops himself. And it's like, it's just another one of the, it felt very genuine.
No, that was in my Jeremy notes too.
Yeah.
It's a great, such great little things in this episode.
Yeah.
And speaking about this bedroom sequence though, I will show my ignorance here. I never realized that Holmes was even wearing a dressing gown in these scenes, because in the story, it says he took off his coat and his waistcoat and put on his blue dressing gown. We'll talk about the color choice in a little bit, but I never differentiated this from his regular coat because, frankly, he is still wearing his waistcoat underneath it in the show. And this dressing gown, if that's what it is, wow, it's a substantial, heavy piece of clothing.
Yeah.
I mean, it looks just like a normal outdoor coat. And then when Watson comes in, he's apparently got his dressing gown on. It looks like a trench coat.
Yeah. I think it's also worth pointing out that Americans don't say dressing gown.
Sure.
So, like, I don't ever have a clear picture of what article of clothing that actually is or how heavy it should be.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like, when they cut to him, I kind of think, yeah, he's wearing a different coat. But
right.
knowing that that's what it is in the story, it's actually the dressing gown. It's like, yeah, okay, but he didn't get changed.
Yeah.
He's still wearing his tie and everything underneath of it. So it just seems like he put on a different coat.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's like exactly like the Paget illustration.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned the sequence where they're in the dog cart on their way with the Gladstone bag and, you know, and the great ADR or, you know, the great audio, whatever it is. There's also a great comedy moment hidden in this dialogue, which I never caught until I looked at the subtitles. Maybe others did.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, after Holmes wakes Watson and they're speeding across the countryside, Holmes says his line about being one of the greatest fools in Europe. And he says, I deserve to be kicked from here to Charing Cross.
Right.
And Watson says, the moment you woke me up, I would have been prepared to, and then like Holmes cuts him off.
Yeah.
I was like, I never caught that line until I turned on the subtitles. And it's a great, again, just Watson in a curmudgeonly mood this whole episode.
Yeah.
But it's a great line, great funny line. Very few fun lines that are that kind of on the nose funny, you know?
Yeah. I wonder if that was a little bit of Edward Hardwicke coming through.
Yeah.
You know, just wanting to infuse a little bit more comedy.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure if this is a Jeremy moment or not, but I love the fact that when he goes into Boone's cell with the Gladstone bag to wash him, he keeps his Homburg hat on. He goes in with his sleeves rolled up and his jacket off, but he keeps his hat on. And it just makes for this fun visual.
Yeah, but, again, in the illustrations, he's wearing his hat, but he's actually wearing his jacket as well.
Oh, is he in the illustration? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I missed that.
And as far as I can tell, it is a Homburger. It's meant to be a Homburg. But again, jumping ahead, that was a Jeremy note I wrote down because I wrote down, the brown Homburg, the waistcoat, the watch chain, the rolled up sleeves. If I could pull it off, that's how I dress.
Yeah. But no, if it's in the illustration, that makes total sense then. I guess I somehow missed that. But yeah. And of course, Bradstreet's greatest line in this episode, but that's a gentleman's wage.
And then I don't know if you noticed also, but Jeremy sucks his teeth right at that moment.
Yeah. Pretty impressive. Impressive. Yeah. Well, in spite of everything I have said about the lighting in this episode being slightly strange in places, I do think the cinematography, generally speaking, in this episode is absolutely top-notch. And I feel like in these sequences, just the most basic, simple stuff when they're shooting Clive Francis telling the story, giving his backstory, it's just all the different shots they manage to get. It's not static, it's not boring. They're getting all these different, profile angles and close-ups and mediums, and it's a lot of shooting and a lot of lighting, and everything looks so good. It's such a quality episode. It's really, really nice.
It really was hard to find bad things. When they're in Bradstreet's office, I was actually looking at the reflections and things, because normally you can see a little bit of light on the wood, on the finished wood.
Yeah.
And at one point I thought I saw it, and then they turn the camera and it's like the whole window is like this frosted window, and that's what was in the reflection. So it's like,
yeah,
it was good. It was good all the way around.
Well, let's take just a moment to mention the makeup, because every time I watch this one, I'm wowed anew by Glenda Wood's makeup job on Clive Francis. I mean, it really is a big old mess.
Yeah.
On his face. I mean, that's really what it is. And it's impossible to tell that it's him underneath. But I think that is what's genius, because it might seem obvious, but so many of Jeremy's makeup jobs as Sherlock in disguise, they're not, frankly, that convincing. You wouldn't fool Watson with that makeup.
Right.
But this one is 100% convincing. And it had to be, because he has to fool his wife.
Yeah.
He's in the same room with his wife.
Well, he also fools Holmes, who says he's seen him multiple times.
Yeah, exactly. But I just think it's so well done. I just think it's
I agree.
It's such great makeup.
Another note on the makeup, when Holmes is pouring the water on him, if you really watch the stream of water, it just turns into like a hose right into his right eye so that the eyepiece falls out.
Yeah, I'm sure it was really hard to get that stuff off.
Mm-hmm.
And, another nod for Mr. Clive Francis here, because every time I watch this, I just like him even more.
Yeah.
His moments on the screen are frankly limited, either as Boone or as Neville St. Clair, but every second he's on screen, he's engrossing. I mean, and his emotions are constantly changing, even within like the course of a single sentence. I just think it's just a perfect performance, and wow, what an amazing guy.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like you said, he's all over the place. He's telling jokes, he's quoting things and being funny. And then Holmes says to him, "You lied to your wife. Is that purity?" And then like his face just drops.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next time we see him, he's real small and tender and just tells his little story. And then,
yeah. I
mean, in terms of this show, there's not very many opportunities that people have had to have that vastness of a character, where you get to change that often. So it was really great to watch.
Yeah, it's a good role and a good actor. And I give the director credit too, because even the very final moments right before the credits,
yeah,
I really love these moments, because there's like this silent moment between Mr. and Mrs. Sinclair. And I just really like that they took the time and gave them that.
Mm-hmm.
Because most of these episodes, Holmes wins the day, and we never get any real closure for the characters. But in this one, we get close up on them facing each other in that moment. I don't know. I really like that ending from a dramatic point of view. It's every time I watch this one, I enjoy everything about it more.
I think it has to be said too, speaking of the director or the writer probably, all of the lines, all of the Shakespeare and the Tennyson and this and that, like none of that was in the original story.
Right.
And just the fact that it's become such like an iconic part of the series to to know that this one's coming up, you know. Like I've always said, when the Crooked Man comes up, I think it's this one.
Yeah.
And this is the one I'm hoping for because it's just, I don't know, it's just special. And in those little things, like those little lines, like they're kind of throwaway funny things, but it's like, I love it.
Oh yeah, we've received emails from people who say they quote from this episode.
Yeah.
If you prick us, do we not bleed? Yeah. Well, let's talk about the books for a moment. Well, this one was first published in the Strand in December 1891 and the New York Strand in January of 1892. But as these were also syndicated into multiple newspapers of the day, it actually appeared in the Philadelphia Inquirer, and many of these newspapers like that made up their own titles for the stories. So this one first appeared as The Strange Tale of a Beggar. That was the inspired title that the Philadelphia Inquirer came up with. Yeah. There's a whole controversy in this story.
Only one?
Well, definitely more than one. But Mary, Watson's wife, refers to him as James in this one.
Mm-hmm.
There are those who think that James is short for his middle name, Hamish. Others think that this one wasn't written by Watson. The only reason I actually found this fun and interesting is because it harkens to young Sherlock Holmes, wherein Sherlock is trying to guess Watson's name when they first meet, and he guesses James. And when called out, he says, James, John, what's the difference? And Watson replies, a great deal.
Yeah.
So it makes me think of that. But there's actually a multi-page essay on this topic in both the Klinger annotated book and the Martin Dakin book.
And the Baring Gould.
Yeah, and the Baring Gould. So if anyone out there wishes to dig deeper into that mystery, that reminds me though, there is one little thing I wanted to read from the Klinger book, which I don't think is in the Baring Gould, but I'm going to read this really quick.
All right.
In one of his final annotations for this story, Leslie Klinger writes, but for sheer audacity, no proposed solution can match that expounded by Robert S. Katz and David N. Haugen. Haugen explains their idea, Mary's James in the twisted lip was not the result of a mistake, typographical error, forgetfulness, or any other previously cited reason. On that quiet evening, she had been silently reliving those days of love with her most ardent suitor. During the ensuing turmoil, it was his name, James, she spoke, not that of her husband. That man, James Moriarty.
Oh, Jesus. Well, yeah. The Baring Gould goes into maybe this was a previous lover, or maybe this was a child from a different marriage, or just forgetfulness because she doesn't remember her husband's name, or that Watson wrote his own name wrong in the story, or it's his younger brother who posed as him after he died prematurely somehow.
I mean, most of the time I just completely ignore and dismiss these things, but this one is just, it is really strange though that Arthur Conan Doyle would somehow get that wrong.
But did he get it wrong, or was it just a nickname?
Yeah.
And his wife calls him that. And if it's Hamish is his middle name, and that actually means James, maybe she's like, I'm going to call you James.
Yeah, and we rarely hear from Mary talking directly to her husband. So yeah, I think that's totally likely and plausible.
I try every time to not comment on these annotations, but it's hard.
That one was just too fun not to go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Speaking of the books some more, the Paget illustrations for this one are different. I only say that because in them, Boone doesn't really look that bad. I mean, compared to the show where he's just got like a melted face, I mean, he really just looks like, you can't even really see his twisted lip in most of the pictures.
Well, that's kind of what I took away from it, is like there wasn't actually a lot of detail, at least in the copies that I have. So
yeah,
but they are quite different. I mean, it says he had a shock of orange hair and dark eyes, and I think because his hair was kind of light, they just went the other way for this show.
I just this is one instance where I'm glad they didn't embrace the illustrations.
Yeah,
went more with a dramatic direction. But well, I really hate to get hung up on these, but there is yet another controversy.
See, I knew there wasn't just one.
This one surrounding the color of Holmes's dressing gown.
Mm-hmm.
In the canon, Watson mentions him having 3 different colors: a blue one, a purple one, and a mouse-colored one. Apparently, it was common to have 1 dressing gown, but having 3, which Holmes seems to have had in the course of the stories, was completely unheard of unless you were an extravagant American, which actually prompted an article titled, "Was Sherlock Holmes an American?" But the Klinger annotated book has a great annotation about this that explains it all. The mouse-colored dressing gown started as blue, faded over time to purple, and when Mrs. Hudson thought Holmes was dead after the final problem, she line-dried it in the sun, which caused it to fade to a mouse color. But the only reason I bring this one up is because in this episode of the show, he's obviously wearing the mouse-colored one, which in his book, Michael Cox talks about, and he says, "We decided that Holmes had brought his mouse-colored dressing gown with him rather than borrowing a blue one, thus adding our contribution to one of the minor mysteries of the canon." So I just thought it was fun that they were thinking about it.
A little wink there.
Yeah, exactly. And, maybe they made things worse by choosing a side, so to speak, or something. But they were thinking about it, which is good to know.
I mean, I can't remember chronologically how these stories all go, but he did just get a king's ransom in terms of the show.
Right.
At the end of the Priory School. So he could afford a mouse-colored and a blue one.
Another book note I wrote down was just to say telephones. They actually have telephones in this story, which is something you don't think of when you watch the show, but coincidentally, do you know the very first words Alexander Graham Bell ever spoke publicly into a telephone?
"I stole this patent."
His words were, "Watson, come here, I want you."
I didn't know that.
Though it's a complete coincidence because it had nothing to do with Sherlock Holmes. He was talking to his assistant.
Interesting.
Yeah. There's a line in the story, I think Holmes says it, where he says, "The bar of gold was the vilest murder trap on the whole riverside."
Yeah.
I don't think they say it in the show, but I wish they would have kept that in because I like that line and I think it says a lot.
Yeah, well, they talk about the back door too. It was like the amount of troubles that have gone through this door or something, and he's like, "You mean bodies?" And he's like, "I do."
Yeah. Okay, well, I think we can, as we said, skip the good because just about everything we've said so far about this episode it falls under the good. And, it's a great episode, so there's no big surprise there. But let's talk about the bad. Do you have any bad notes?
Well, other than the ones we kind of decided weren't very bad, I would say, would someone as smart and as strong-willed as Mrs. St. Clair not recognize her husband's voice?
Yeah.
She was pretty aware of everything else that was going on. And then to just be in the room with her husband and not notice his voice.
Yeah, a bit of a stretch, but he was a great performer. Other than the dog cart thing I already described, I really only have one other note that I think could be considered bad. And that is, during Neville St. Clair's flashback, when he tells the tale of what happened, this is the second time we see what happened, because the first time being from Mrs. St. Clair's point of view, this time we're a bit closer on Mr. St. Clair when he pulls himself by his hair back into the Lasker's room.
Right.
The first time, it's wider and lower, and it's her POV, but he definitely doesn't do that. He just kind of goes back. You don't see his hand grab his own head.
That's true.
And, one could argue, I guess, that each is a memory from a different person, but it's just definitely an inconsistency.
Yeah, it's inconsistent, but that's kind of how I took it too. That it's just different memories.
Yeah. And that's really all the bad I have, which is not much. But there was a note that I forgot that I wanted to make a mention of, and that is the Lasker. I thought the actor who played him was really good.
Yeah, I did too.
Albert Moses was his name. He passed away just a few years back, 2017, I think. But look him up sometime. He is in a ton of great stuff. He's in some Bond films. He was in American Werewolf in London, Tales of the Unexpected, Jewel in the Crown. It's just another example of Granada. They could have cast anyone in this tiny little role, but they got someone with real gravitas and experience. And I just think he's a joy to watch. I love his scenes. I love how he goes from being the bad guy to the good guy when he's trying to help him out,
Yeah. Gravitas is the right word, because I felt the same way. I felt like I was watching it and I was thinking, I don't know who this actor is, but I bet if I looked him up, he's been in a ton of stuff.
Yeah.
I thought it was really well played. I do have a couple other bad notes.
Yeah.
I did write down when Holmes is in the police station and he says, "It's better to learn wisdom late than to never learn it at all." And then he says Bradstreet at the end of it. And it just sounded like he was quoting Bradstreet when he said it. Like keeping up with Boone's game, you know?
Yeah.
Because it's just the way that comes out. It's like, it's better to learn wisdom late than never learn at all. Bradstreet.
Kind of awkward.
Yeah. I don't know if this is necessarily a bad thing, but I wrote down the enormous effing sponge.
Yeah.
In the entire sudsing up scene. It's like silly. It's pretty much silly.
It's almost over the top. And that sponge, yeah, I was wondering, like, is that the largest sponge you can purchase on the entire planet? It's
like,
huge.
Why didn't you get the big one?
There's another interesting detail there, which is when he pulls things out of that Gladstone bag, he pulls out a straight razor.
Yeah.
Like he was expecting to maybe shave him.
Yeah. Every time it comes on, I wonder if he's just pulling out more stuff just to make him more nervous.
Yeah.
Like, we're going to shave you, we're going to brush your teeth, and then here's this sponge.
Yeah, possibly. Well, finally, there's the Jeremy. Are there any great Jeremy bits we haven't touched on?
I just wrote down when he's scoffing at Mrs. St. Clair's insistence that Neville is alive. Just the kind of like, you know, that he does.
Yeah.
How about you?
There is a little moment where he says, Dr. Watson is a specialist in uncontrolled addiction. And it's like there's a little gleam in his eye because...
It's like a jab at him.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I thought that was fun. I love the moment when he's tickling his feet and trying to wake him up, you know.
Yeah.
Watson.
It's also a good moment with Watson, Edward Harbuck, you know, because just the tired acting right there. Very believable.
Yeah.
Like, he looked really tired.
I don't know how many notes I have in here about the hand acting, but Jeremy Brett, if there was an award for hand acting this show, he would take it home. I mean, between the sponge coming out and just him looking at the letter with the little magnifying glass.
Clapping in the mirror,
but like that whole sequence with the letter, he's holding it and he's in close-up or medium close-up almost the entire sequence, and he's using the letter all the time, pointing at things, moving it in and out of frame. When they're in the bedroom and he's got his pipe, he's using his pipe to accentuate words.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's just so much hand acting. I mean, when he's looking at the coins and the wallet and he's smelling the jacket and everything, and he just puts his finger up to his lips when he's talking to Bradstreet. It's frankly like so ingenious that there is so much hand acting in this episode, and not a single time does it ruin it.
Yeah, we always say it's very easy to ruin it with hand acting.
Very easy to do that stuff wrong, and he does it the entire episode. Every bit of it is great.
It's just down to his natural flamboyance.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, let's do it. Persian slippers. You go first.
See, this is going to get increasingly difficult to do. Because I think maybe my instinct and everything I just said aren't going to line up exactly. Because I think I'm going to give it like 8.7. I like everything in it, but I don't really like the mystery. I like it a lot, and I like every actor that's in it, and I like all the acting, and I like most everything in it. I mean, the beginning, the dodge, the misdirection, maybe that's being a little unkind, but I think I'm going to stick to it because I think I rate everything pretty high.
Well, I am definitely going to go higher because I like this episode quite a bit. I think it's one of the best, but it's hard to say it's one of the best when they're all one of the best up to this point.
Yeah.
It's just, it's so hard. But I love this one, and the more I watch it, the more I love it. And maybe that's because I haven't actually watched this one as many times as some of the others. But while I don't feel like it's heavy on classic moments, there's just very few complaints. That dog cart scene is a ding, in my opinion. But when I look at the scores that I've given these and I kind of judge it based on the series as a whole, I do think it's right up there. It's way up there. And I think I'm going to go 9.7.
That's up there.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's hard to defend, I guess. But to me, it's just, I'm thinking what we've just seen. We have Moriarty. We have the Red-Headed League. We have the Dancing Men, Solitary Cyclists. Like, to me, these are like the most classic we're going to ever have.
Yeah.
And then there's this. Like, I think this comes right under those.
Sure.
Which I would say if I rated all those 9s, this would be right underneath of it. Maybe I would bump it up to 8.8. Because reading the story along with the episode, to me, I just felt like either it would have solved itself within a couple of hours.
Sure.
Because I think in the story, Bradstreet says, we're going to give him a bath once we book him anyway.
Yeah.
Then it would have been over. So it's just that Holmes got there early.
No, that's all legit. I can see all that. But something about it, and I just have a soft spot for Clive Francis, and
he definitely elevates it for sure.
Yeah.
So let's give it an 8.8.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Okay, well, it's time for Mrs. Hudson's housekeeping.
In early August, it was announced that NHK in Japan would be broadcasting the Granada series on their 4K channel, even though it appears to be just an upscaling. But we wanted to say thank you to Yu Chung Mao for letting us know.
Yeah.
We do appear to have a lot of listeners in Japan, which is great. So it's just amazing to just see how far this series reaches. So hello in Japan.
Hello, Japan. I'm not sure it qualifies as housekeeping, but I did pick up the latest installment in the Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective board game series. The new one's called The Baker Street Irregulars, and I have not yet found the time to play it, but according to the reviews, it is a very good addition to the series, rivaling the original game. So I am very excited to try it, and I will report back once I have. I have made some other Sherlockian purchases lately. I got a nice old tin that contains 2 Christopher Lee films, Sherlock Holmes and the Leading Lady, as well as Sherlock Holmes and the Incident at Victoria Falls. And these are both, later in Christopher Lee's career. But I also picked up a Blu-ray set from Severin called The Eurocrypt of Christopher Lee that, among other things, includes Sherlock Holmes and the Deadly Necklace from 1962, which is a real oddity because apparently it's a German film that was shot in English, but then dubbed into German. And in so doing, the original audio track was lost, so that when they released it in America, they had to get another actor to redub Christopher Lee, so it's not even his voice in the film, which, it's an interesting little oddity, though I have to admit, not a great movie. But I think this is the first time it's ever been released on Blu-ray in this Severin set, so it's kind of cool.
Yeah.
The other movies in there are horror movies, but none of these things compares to something I picked up on eBay. Now, this might be a bit controversial because I know there's some controversy with this seller in some of the Facebook groups, but a fellow who claimed to be selling some items from the Granada series listed a few pieces on eBay, and one of those was a piece from Dr. Mortimer's walking stick in Hound of the Baskervilles. And the piece that he listed was the silver band with the actual engraving on it that says Charing Cross Hospital or whatever it says.
Yeah.
He didn't have the whole stick. He didn't have the top handle, and the stick itself was broken. But I managed to just buy the band with the engraving. And it's very hard to say for sure, of course, but looking closely at the show, it does appear to be a match. I suppose it could be a forgery. Why anyone would forge such a thing, I don't know. But the seller said that his uncle had been friends with the prop master on the series, David Round, which, it's kind of an obscure name to just grab if you're trying to defraud people on eBay. It's hard to say.
It's a very weird prop to go for, too.
Yeah, exactly. And he had a few other items, but sold all of them before I got wind of any of it. So it's hard to 100% authenticate these kind of things, but it seems legit. And if we ever decide to release a prop replica of the walking stick, well, we have the original engraving to draw from, so it's pretty cool.
Good reference.
In the meantime, I'll have to figure out, what to do with this small steel band. Maybe I'll get a walking stick eventually for it. We'll see.
Speaking of Sherlockian merchandise, if you want to show your love for the series or even publicly identify yourself as a Breton or confound your friends with a coded message on a t-shirt, check out our merch store. The link is on our website at sherlockpodcast.com.
And just a quick congratulations to our friends Scott and Bert over at the I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere podcast. They just celebrated their 221st episode a few weeks back. So kudos to those guys for providing so many great hours of Sherlockian entertainment and education.
Definitely.
I hope someday we can say we reached 221 episodes of anything.
Yeah. Congrats, guys. Lots of photos of different shooting locations are being sent in by our listeners, which we will start posting as they become relevant. But I want to say a quick thank you also to Mark, Oliver, David, and Ian. Thanks for sending all those in and visiting those locations.
Definitely. Thanks, guys. Okay, well, we have quite a few responses to the Abbey Grange that I want to get to, but before we do, and speaking of those location photos, a good friend of the show, Bo, wrote in with a quick note in response to the email we read last time from Mark about the house from the Norwood builder and how the singer Morrissey now lives there. Well, Bo wrote in with a, frankly, priceless audio clip of Morrissey himself talking about the house in which he lives and even talking about that episode of the Granada series. So, without further ado, let's give that clip a listen.
Now welcoming Morrissey.
It's just a very big old Victorian house. It's from 1854. The interesting thing about this program is that they filmed one of them, would you believe it, in my house. And it's fascinating because they did an entire episode of Sherlock Holmes in my house. They used the house for the series. Well, it's the episode where there is a tramp, a hobo, who is at the top of the house, and he's living at the top of the house, and for some reason he causes a fire in this attic loft, and he goes on fire.
And that was Morrissey, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, I mean, is hilarious too strong a word here?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess it kind of shows you it's not his bag.
Yeah, I mean, presumably he watched it at least once and somehow managed to completely miss the entire plot.
Yeah. Well, there was a fire, there was a house, and there was a hobo, so.
All true, all true.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Bo, for sending that in. And for anyone who wants to track down that full conversation, it was included on a limited edition promotional interview CD from 1997. And Bo also sent over an image of that CD, which we'll post on Twitter so you can see Mr. Morrissey himself looking out the window of the Norwood house.
In all his glory.
We have a note here from Lexi, who writes, "Hi, Gus and Luke. I thought you might like to see this painting, which I believe the Abbey Grange designers used as inspiration for their boat party setting." And she includes an image of James Tissot's The Ball on Shipboard, circa 1874, which I have to admit is pretty strikingly similar.
Yeah, I think we have to give her that one.
Yeah, and Lexi writes, "The painting is currently held by the Tate, though not on display, but there's more information on Tate's website. I think Granada's designers were influenced by Tissot more than once. The master blackmailer seems to draw on painters including Tissot, Manet, and Constantin Guy. Coincidentally, James Tissot had his London studio in St. John's Wood, near the home of Irene Adler, just north of Baker Street. I love your attention to detail as you review each Sherlock Holmes episode, and your interviews add so much to my appreciation of the artists who made the series. With best wishes, Lexi." Thanks, Lexi.
Yeah.
And what a great painting. And I think you're almost certainly right.
Yeah.
We've actually had a few conversations lately, which, again, we'll hope to release very soon, where different crew members and writers who worked with Peter Hammond, who was the director on that episode, admitted that he was constantly trying to recreate famous paintings and other artwork. So I think that's highly likely to be true in this case.
Yeah, we'll put this up as an artifact on the Twitter feed and Facebook as well.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for writing in, Lexi.
Yeah.
Friend of the show, Ellie, wrote in response to the Abbey Grange. She writes, "Ted's delivery of the line, 'Why do you not write them yourself?' also seemed a little flat to me when I first saw the episode. In the book, Watson says he replied, 'with some bitterness.' But then Jeremy's reply, 'I will, my dear Watson, I will, in my declining years,' is more amusingly snarky than described in the book, which makes the exchange less acrimonious and more like playful bickering. It's like they are an old married couple." Yeah, I think that's a good take on it. I mean, I think we get more of that old married couple dynamic as they go on. I mean, the cart ride in this episode, just to name one. But yeah, I mean, good observation.
I think that's fair. And yeah. I think it's also worth pointing out that this was Edward Hardwicke's first episode. So, I mean, maybe figuring out the character a little bit, but I think that's fair.
Yeah, true enough. Ellie also asked us to talk a bit more about the Werner Herzog shoot, but I don't think we're really quite allowed to yet. Hopefully soon. I mean, the craziest and best part of the whole thing was just that it was you and I. We were the entire crew.
Yeah.
What more can be said? It was a completely crazy shoot.
It was crazy. I just had a notepad going of Werner Herzog quotes, so I didn't forget them.
Nice. But regardless of how crazy it was, it's Werner Herzog, so I'm just happy we got to be a part of it.
Definitely.
Old friend of the show, Mary, wrote in. She also had some comments about the Abbey Grange. She wrote, I guess I fit the stereotype of people who adore this episode, since I'm really into Jane Austen, the Brontes, and romantic literature. I think the acting in the supporting roles, however, is some of the strongest and most subtle of the entire second series. Don't get me wrong, I love the occasional melodramatic turn, but the lack of sentimentality in Mary and her captain's portrayal of their affection is incredibly moving. And Teresa, what a beautifully understated performance. For these reasons, I find the story genuinely romantic rather than treacly, which sometimes romance can seem in mystery shows because it's not fully fleshed out. I think the letter read on air was spot on in terms of the appeal for women of the canon. Even when women are in trouble, they reveal themselves to be far more capable than society believes them to be based on their gender. And Holmes never patronizes an intelligent woman. Doyle didn't support women's suffrage, alas, but his father was mentally ill, and his mother suffered terribly because of it. That compassion is seen in this show. But yeah, I mean, as usual, I agree with most of what Mary has to say here. Not being of the female persuasion, I'm never sure how the women of the canon come across to ladies of today, but it's good to keep hearing that, by and large, it's not being taken in a negative way by today's ever-changing standards.
Like you said, today's standards might take these quotes a little differently, but I think it was meant in a positive way.
Yeah, totally. Listener Jessica writes, Hello, Gus and Luke. I've been looking forward to and enjoying your podcasts about the return of Sherlock Holmes. This season has all of my favorite episodes, like The Second Stain, The Six Napoleons, The Priory School, and The Abbey Grange, which are just back-to-back-to-back home runs. I was surprised, however, to hear your confusion about Holmes and Watson's prolonged reactions to Lady Brackenstall's description of Sir Eustace's alcoholism in the Abbey Grange. I do not find it confusing at all when you consider that she is unknowingly, but perfectly, describing Holmes' own addiction. She details her husband's functioning alcoholism, his knowledge of her disapproval, and his efforts to hide it from her. This perfectly reflects Holmes's and Watson's own actions in the episode, like the Musgrave Ritual and the upcoming Devil's Foot. I believe that the characters see themselves in her words and exchange knowing looks accordingly. Near the end of the episode, Watson relates to Mary when he says that her loving and tender description does not match the person that Sir Eustace turned out to be. He completely understands when she reveals that she was actually describing her father. This always seemed to me a great development of the friendship between Holmes and Watson, and might have even inspired Holmes's later decision to kick the habit. Thanks again for the great podcast, and keep up the good work, Jessica. Well, thank you, Jessica. I guess I never thought of those looks in quite that way, but that does make sense. I mean, it's a possible explanation. I will now need to go watch that episode again through that lens and see how it feels, but it certainly makes sense.
I think the only difference here is that Holmes doesn't really hide his addiction ever from Watson. Usually he kind of puts it in his face.
Right.
But I do think it's possible that the showrunners were thinking ahead that way, or maybe even just Jeremy was thinking about that. And as you said, with the Devil's Foot, maybe it was a good logical explanation, a good ending for that arc of the character.
Right.
We'll have to watch it again, though.
Oh, and Jessica also writes, P.S., will we ever hear from you a discussion of the Four Oaks mystery? Well, the answer to that is yes. When we get there in the chronology of the series, we will certainly be talking about it. For those who don't know, the Four Oaks mystery was part of a charity telethon put on by ITV in 1992, I believe. It's just a little 10-minute mini mystery with Jeremy and Edward. And truth be told, it's not amazing. But when the time comes, we'll definitely be covering it. Have no fear. Stella writes in to say, "Hi, I've just found your podcast and I really enjoy listening to your reflections on the series. The first time I came into contact with Sherlock Holmes was via the Sherlock BBC series. In a crave for a new Sherlock Holmes series, I found the Granada one, and I'm now deeply in love with it, and I've seen it many times. I made it my mission to watch many actors playing Holmes, and I have seen 12 so far, but Jeremy Brett's performance is in a completely different universe. But now to the thing I've been thinking of. In the first 3 episodes, David Burke's hair changes a lot. You can almost see in which order they filmed the episodes. In A Scandal in Bohemia, he has the normal red-brownish color. In The Solitary Cyclist, his hair is almost totally gray, and in The Naval Treaty, it's almost black. I have no idea why they would change his hair so much, but there must be a note of it somewhere. I wish you all the best, Stella." Thanks, Stella. Well, I wish we had a good answer for you on this. Even though The Solitary Cyclist was the 4th one shown, it was actually the first one shot, and I believe Scandal was the 4th one shot. But if you look at the photos of David Burke from that time, his hair was actually beginning to gray quite a bit. So I have a feeling that they were constantly striving to keep him younger, which, might have taken a few attempts to find the right hair color for him. I'm not 100% sure on this, but very good observation. But yeah, check out some photos of him just from around that time, but not on set, and you'll see that his hair was actually quite different than it was in the show.
That's a good observation. It's another thing I kind of feel like I need to go back and watch again. Maybe the hair dye back then wasn't as great, so they're testing different hair dye. You think they would have done it before rolling, but hard to say.
There's also the matter of lights and color correction, and so it's like getting that balance of the color right is sometimes very difficult. Yeah, especially when the hair is light or thin. It's hard to do sometimes.
Yeah, and to that same point, if you look at the hats, as we always talk about, the hats kind of change colors through different scenes too. So
yeah, for sure. Well, I think we'll read just one more email. Ollie writes in to say, "Dear Luke and Gus, I thought I'd write you now that I've finally caught up with the latest episode of your wonderful podcast, which also means that my ritual comes to an end. During the last few weeks, I took 2 days for each story. First, reading the original, then watching the Granada episode, and listening to the corresponding one from the podcast, and finally, reading another chunk of Bending the Willow. I think I will keep up the first 3 parts of this for every podcast episode that's to come. I am one of the younger fans of the show. The final episode aired before I was born, and I only discovered it last year. Before that, I had never had much to do with Holmes. The only slight connection I had to any of the material were the 2 episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation with Data cosplaying Holmes and the computer conjuring Moriarty. And while Brent Spiner's Patrick Stewart imitation didn't have me entirely convinced, I always adored Daniel Davis's performance as Moriarty. Until discovering Granada's take on everything, I didn't feel the need to dig deeper into the Holmes universe. Only loads of beautiful gifts convinced me that I needed to find and get into this amazing series, and I haven't regretted it. Being a fan of Next Generation, I was very happy to see Marina Sirtis pop up in The Six Napoleons, although sad that she didn't get that much to do, and cherished your interview with David Carson. As I dug a little deeper into Granada Holmes and its protagonists, I was delighted to find another neat little connection. Dwight Schultz, Star Trek's Lieutenant Barclay, who accidentally lets Moriarty loose in the second Holmes-themed episode, also appeared in the LA production of The Crucifer of Blood, which of course starred Jeremy Brett as Dr. Watson. And, being left-handed myself, I love that there are so many lefties in my favorite Holmes productions. Next Generation has a full set with Spiner, Burton, and Davis, and while Jeremy did quite a good job of pretending to be right-handed, after paying a bit of attention, I found it pretty obvious that he wasn't. I don't know if other left-handed people have this too, but I always feel a connection to someone when I discover this one random thing we have in common. And now for something completely different. Since my recent rewatch, I consider that minute from The Resident Patient, where Holmes and Watson return from the barber's, have a bit of teamwork deduction, and then return to their rooms while Beethoven plays in the background, to be my favorite minute from the whole show. Since I rewatched this, I've listened to that third movement of that violin concerto at least twice every day and can now barely hold myself together whenever you use it as the background for the housekeeping part of your episodes. You have good taste, my friend. He says, "Finally, today, I finished Bending the Willow. I love that Davies decided to have the last chapter be about laughter, the perfect way to lift spirits after the very sad pages preceding it. In his afterword, he talks about how he suspects that Jeremy's position as one of the finest portrayers of Sherlock Holmes might be slipping. Since I am not immersed in the Sherlock fandom at all, and haven't much talked about Holmes things outside of my Granada bubble, I can't really speak to it in relation to other portrayals. I only see that, of course, Cumberbatch is everywhere nowadays, and Rathbone seems to be staying. But only a year ago, his performance managed to entice and capture a young German, who then came together with some online friends on the 25th anniversary of Jeremy Brett's death to watch a long list of his TV appearances, including several Holmes episodes and his perfect portrayal of Basil Hallward, and will now forever keep him on their favorite actors list. He got me, and I will always keep coming back, and also try to infect more people with my love for the show and its take on these characters and stories. Thank you for your great work dissecting, analyzing, and appreciating this gem of a series. It's been a highlight of my last few weeks. All the best from Germany, Ollie." Thank you, Ollie. Always good to hear from a fellow Next Generation fan.
Yeah. I think, unfortunately for you, you started at the top. You're going to have to go watch other Holmes that aren't necessarily as great, but luckily there's a lot to pick from.
And what's funny is, I was a big Sherlock fan before I was a Next Gen fan, so the Sherlock Holmes stuff on the Enterprise always kind of rubbed me the wrong way. I guess I was a purist, even then, but over the years, those episodes have come to grow on me, and I think the actor who plays Moriarty on that show, you're right, he was very, very good, Daniel Davis, so yeah, great stuff.
I do think that's something to the Sherlock fandom, though. I think everybody's very protective of the original stories.
Yeah.
So when a farce or a pastiche is released, you read them carefully.
Yeah, and the Next Generation stuff is interesting because the first time Moriarty appears, I think it's in season 2, if I'm not mistaken, because I seem to remember Dr. Pulaski in that one. But, season 2, not the best season of Next Generation. They didn't hit their stride till season 3. But the second appearance of Moriarty, when Barclay brings him out, is, it's definitely, I'll go ahead and say, a great episode of Next Generation. So, definitely suggest that to people.
If you like that, you should check out Futurama if you haven't already, because they do a lot of Next Generation gags. And one of the gags they do is of the holodeck where Moriarty comes out.
Yeah.
What's funny to me is that in that version, Moriarty has really long fingernails again.
Well, it'd be interesting to know if they actually got Daniel Davis to do the voice in Futurama. I'd be very, very impressed if they did.
No, I don't think they did. I don't think he had any lines. But they did get all of the original cast that was alive at the time to come back for a special episode. And a lot of Next Generation people have been on the show from time to time.
For sure. As for your comments about David Stewart Davies, well, we typically keep this kind of thing close to the vest, but we actually just had an incredible conversation with the man himself, David Stewart Davies. Because as some of you probably already know, his incredible book, Bending the Willow, is at long last being reissued after many years of being out of print.
Yeah.
We don't have a release date on that yet, but it's on the way. So follow David on Twitter and keep an eye out for that, and for our interview as well, which likely won't see the light of day until his book is ready to hit the shelves, but it shouldn't be too long now.
Yeah, and for all the people who've been wondering, how do you get a copy of this book without spending $1,000 or more?
Yeah.
Wait till hopefully, end of the year.
We're told end of the year, so we're hopeful that it will see the light of day then. And our conversation, it really was a fantastic one, so really looking forward to sharing that with you. just as soon as we can.
Yeah.
Thank you, Luke. Always a pleasure to discuss one of the greats. And this one certainly qualifies. As always, please do find us on the web at twitter.com/SherlockPod. We are on YouTube and Facebook as well. And please send any thoughts and feedback to contact@SherlockPodcast.com. We always love to hear from you. We also continue to add content to our Patreon page. Particularly, we've been adding bonus audio from our interviews, some behind-the-scenes photos, and some fun cutting room floor snips from the episodes. The Patreon support really does mean the world to us and helps us keep the podcast going. So please do consider joining us there at patreon.com/SherlockPodcast. And to all of our existing patrons, as always, our sincerest thanks. The next episode will be our full interview with the man with the twisted lip himself, Mr. Clive Francis. But following that, we are so excited to dive into one of the all-time greatest entries to the Granada series. I refer to, of course, the 6 Napoleons. Until then,